Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining Demonstrated Success. And thank you to the New Hampshire Department of Ed for helping put on virtual and in-person cooperative learning strategies. Today's Thursday, February 11th, and we're so glad you're with us. We would like to remind you all to put yourselves on mute to start, and that way we can kind of get through the slides and get through things and then open for discussion. As you know, the presenter is Karen Matzo. Wonderful, Karen. You can read all about she and I later on. We'll get this show on the road.
Okay. And Beth, you'll keep admitting folks?
I'll admit people as they come. I would like to remind everyone, I'm going to put it in the chat too. You all are sent a link. I'm going to say 48 hours after within 48 hours after the webinar. We strive for 24. Occasionally it's been a little bit more than that. The link will have a folder for you with the PowerPoint. It will also have your professional development certificate. So you need to go into that folder and download your professional development certificate, and then you're all set. And as always, please feel free to write any questions you want in the chat, and I will interrupt Karen as we go along. And at the end, we can open the session up for everyone to just speak freely. We want to thank you all for your dedication to yourselves and your students, making this year better for all of you. Thank you to the New Hampshire Department of Ed for their support and putting this on. Please keep an eye out for the survey. As a favor to us, we would really appreciate your feedback. It takes about a minute to do. So that would be really super if you could take time, that 1 minute for us, and let us know your thoughts on this and what else you'd like to see. And I think that pretty much covers it. Again, don't hesitate to write in the chat box.
Okay, and can I just ask you guys to mute again? And Beth, maybe you can go through while I'm presenting and mute everybody.
Yes, I will do that.
I'm sure there's people that are multitasking and not realizing that they are not muted. Okay. So I'm actually just gonna see if I can mute everybody.
Yeah, I'm doing that right now. Sorry.
Clearly,
I did not get them. I thought
there is one where you can just mute everyone.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. All right. Well, it looks like Beth's done a good job because I don't hear that background noise anymore. Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Matzo. I am the PD director. Thanks, Beth, by the way. I'm Karen. I'm the PD director at Demonstrated Success. And
finally, let me just conclude.
We have some goals for today, right? In the next hour. I would love if all of you left understanding the benefits of cooperative and collaborative learning. And three things that you might want to do with your students in support of cooperative learning. And then maybe choose one method of self-assessment for those same students. Okay, so here's the agenda. We're going to talk about cooperative and collaborative learning and why do it. And then we will talk about how to do it well. And then I'm going to share some techniques and strategies. And then we're going to close. So we'll just keep it simple. And in general, my style is to be fairly chock full and move at a pretty brisk pace because I want to give you a lot of resources. I suspect that many of you on the call know a lot about cooperative and collaborative learning, right? So, so we'll breeze through some of this and hopefully you'll be able to walk away with some things that you can use in the upcoming week. So one of the things that we need to talk about before we really start, but then sort of not talk about too much, is the cooperative versus collaborative, right? And so if you go into the academic writing, right, around cooperative and collaborative, then there's distinct differences. And I guess what I want to say is my overall message here is don't spend a lot of time trying to define something as either cooperative or collaborative, right? But I do want to contrast it for you just so we can all sound intelligent when we're talking about it with other people and acknowledging that there are differences, right? So the purple is the middle, right? We combine blue and red to be purple. And in both models, right, students are constructing meaning and understanding and knowledge together. Students share processes and goals. In both, individuals are responsible to the group, right? And both build interdependence and a really positive shared culture in your classroom. So if you're going to contrast them to, then know that a cooperative activity, technically speaking, right, is theoretically more teacher structured. The teacher manages the resources more, the interactions are monitored more. There's probably more scaffolding by the teacher. Structures are provided by the teacher, and the teacher is more involved in the assessment process. And for collaborative, right, it's theoretically, right, more student driven. Students source their content, it's less monitored by the teacher, there's more self-assessment than teacher assessment. This is all well and good, all right? But really, it's a bit of a continuum more than anything else. And so the main questions that you have to think about for your particular group of students is, how much scaffolding do they need? How independent can they be? How much choice do I want to give them? How much independence? And so those are the questions that you want to think about. I wouldn't spend too much time trying to figure out if you're doing collaborative learning or cooperative learning. Okay, but you will see in the literature that there's differences. So what I'd love for you to do now is, can you please write into the chat about what you see as the benefits of this kind of learning together and for students developing understanding and meaning together through shared sort of student-driven experience. So I'm going to open up the chat. And if you could flood the chat, that would be great. What do you see as the benefits? Learning from each other. Thanks, Susan. And Andrea says more students get involved. Jill speaks about the investment, greater student investment. Danette, more personal connections to attach meaning. Danette, we've met. I know we have. Students take responsibility for their learning. Thanks, Patricia. 21st century skills, career ready. So like
Yes.
Emily was saying, and that, you know, around communication, collaboration, empathy, self-advocacy, those sorts of 21st century skills. Karen is speaking to the fact that students are more likely to get involved, and Jillian, more cohesive learning environment. Okay, those are all some really good ideas to mention, and all true, right? So there's tons of benefit. And we're going to talk a little more, go in a little more depth about the benefits, and then talk about, even though how it's so beneficial, right? Why don't we do more of it? So we'll talk about that later. But a lot of these are things that you guys have written in. So in terms of the social benefits, there's a lot of social benefits, right? You develop a social support system for your students. They become each other's social support. There's more diverse understanding. You're more apt to develop a culture of understanding and empathy. Students can, you know, model and practice together cooperatively outside of the learning experience that you're facilitating. Strong learning culture. There's also more hands and more minds to provide individual attention, right? So in this situation, if you can create this cooperative environment, then peers can become accustomed to going to other peers for assistance, which is fabulous. And then this last one is something you may not be aware of, but for certain groups, cultural groups, a more collaborative way of learning has been shown in research to benefit versus an individualistic or competitive group, right? So one of the main groups that have been involved in this research is African American kids and also Latino kids. They learn best in collaborative situations, in mutually supportive situations and communities, as opposed to what is a more traditional individualistic or competitive method in the United States historically. So that's something to think about. And that research isn't new. So those are sort of the social benefits, not to mention the fact that basically you can also help kids create friendships through the learning process. So for kids that are having trouble creating friendships, it certainly offers a social outlet for them. The psychological benefits, the more student agency and the more power that we give our kids in the learning experience, the more positive effect it has on their self-esteem and their sense of self-worth, right? It develops agency. Cooperation reduces anxiety in most students. And this is all research-based. I want to say most students because, of course, we all know that for many students, it creates a considerable amount of anxiety. So there will likely be a couple of kids in your class, right, for whom this sort of interaction makes them anxious. And you'd have to make modifications and accommodations for that. It's been shown, to develop positive attitudes towards teachers. Again, self-efficacy, collective efficacy. And so in case you are unsure about the meanings of those words, right? Self-efficacy is the sense that we have about our ability to impact change and reach the goals that we set. And then collective efficacy as a whole group, right? As your whole class, if your class has faith that together, or a small group of 5 or 6 together, they can achieve the goals that they've set. It builds up that sense of efficacy. And student agency, right? We talked about that. And academically, critical thinking skills. Students are engaged in the learning process actively. Research does show that classroom results, academic results are improved, and students learn how to problem solve. And cooperative learning provides a setting for you to help students transfer skills, right? So like, for instance, in project-based or problem-based learning, right? That's all about transfer. It's all about the skills that kids have learned that then they're taking to a real problem that they're going to solve together, and to transfer those skills into applied situation. Students support each other in their learning, and they can translate for each other, right? How many times have we had that happen where a fellow student is actually better at explaining what a student is struggling with, or sister or brother, right? They're better at explaining it than the teacher, him or herself, or than us. Any questions or comments so far?
None so far.
Okay.
Well, Dina and Spohn had just mentioned that more students are invested because everyone comes from different experiences, and all this, just great comments. Yeah,
yeah.
Nothing else.
And they bring that experience. Yeah. And I'm realizing now, as you said that, Dina, cooperative learning forces students to interact with students that are not like them, with students that have different learning styles, different lived experiences. So it certainly adds to our issues around or our exploration of equity and our intentions as teachers to sort of create more fair and just and equitable mindsets in our kids. So.
Yeah, and Simone had mentioned students learn to be part of a team and collaborate while taking responsibility for their own learning. I mean, that's a lot going on, and it's all positive.
So here are some components to make sure that you think about to be effective, right? And I think probably everyone on the call has seen this. Like, unless you create an environment where students are interdependent right? Meaning that their goals are so tied in with everybody else. Then you have to do that in order for it to be successful. And at the same time, you have to build for individual accountability. And you have to set up kids, right, to positively interact and to support and encourage each other. So you have to set up those norms of behavior and make sure that they're internalized before you start the work. You have to teach them how to communicate and solve problems together, right? We can't assume. I find what happens sometimes, and I see this a lot as the grades increase, there's an assumption that students know how to work together and communicate and support each other. And I think even at the high school level, it really has to be taught and modeled and posted and revisited. And then the last piece is just giving groups time for self-reflection, right? How well their group functioned, how well each individual functioned in the group. So those are sort of the key ingredients. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about interdependence, that very first bullet up there, right here. You have to make it so that the students have to collaborate in order to create the product or complete the task. And that they have to believe over time. And it's a beautiful thing if we can teach this to our kids, that the outcome is stronger with the support and the help of the group, even though sometimes it's more complicated and tiring to work with a group. So, I mean, that is something that is really worth emphasizing and teaching kids. So these are just some examples about how you create that interdependence, right? You can assign product roles, researcher, writer, illustrator, editor, presenter, translator, and each of those, the products of each of those people are imperative or essential for the outcome or the product, or process roles, timekeeper, note taker, materials gatherer, facilitator, norms monitor, right? These are all ways that we can make sure that the process doesn't run without the involvement of everyone in the group. And again, that has to be assigned or student chosen, but it has to be explicit. Now, I think it was the second bullet that spoke to individual accountability. This is just an example of a way towards individual accountability. The group can keep a work log where everybody writes down what they've done, and that way also individual pieces of the process can be evaluated so that we have individual accountability there. Self-assessment, how did I function in this group? And to have that reported back, shared with the group for advanced levels, right? Or at the very least, reported back to the teacher so that the teacher can watch for that individual accountability. And if you do get to a point where you have a high functioning group, you can have a peer assessment of other members where the group itself, if there's 5 kids, then, peers can sort of provide warm and cool feedback to individuals in the group. And then you have a collective assessment, right? Where you might have a quick survey of 5 questions where each individual in the group sort of assesses the group's functioning, and then anonymously, and then you can share that back out with the group, right? So there's a lot of different ways. And then there's teacher observations and interviews with group members, which is another way to encourage individual accountability. And on the right-hand side, that's a teacher observation form where you might put your students' names down the left column and then evaluate the students as you're, observing your groups working. This is another form for individual accountability. This is an example of what I was describing earlier. So, and this would be filled out personally as a group member and then handed into the teacher, right? You could facilitate a process where it was shared with the full group which I think would be amazing for group growth. I think I have, yep. And this is an example of the keeping track of tasks. So you have the task, to whom it was assigned, the date, and whether it's done, just so that there is, I find a lot of times, you'll come back and a group will come back and say one particular member didn't participate or do what he or she committed to do. And so this could be a way of keeping that individual accountability. So the other thing is teaching the kids how to support each other. And in addition to the skills required in that, there's a certain culture, right? Group culture that you want to develop. And so I think part of that, these are some ideas to do that in groups. These are some fun things to do. First of all, you could, have them establish a name together and a mascot or a symbol or something. And I guess before I go on, I want to encourage you to take the time to do these things, right? To take the time to have groups build their group culture and their connections, because I think even though it takes time at the front load, I think in the end, you'll have higher performing groups faster, and you'll be able to get into the process earlier in the year. Right, having them identify working norms together. And of course, you would have to provide them with models and facilitate a protocol for conversation. Sometimes if I'm doing this with groups of adults, I'll say, well, what bugs you the most in a meeting? And everyone will write their things down. And, what do you think? And just these protocols that I can share with you to help groups do this. And then the last piece is, was there a question, Beth?
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask. Yeah, we have a great question. How long do you suggest keeping the same groups together?
Well, first of all, I would keep them together a while so that they experience repetitive success together. So I think that you would want to give them enough time to become a cohesive group and to practice and grow their group skills. And it's a big investment, right? Because there's a certain amount of trust that develops and camaraderie, and I would ride that. And so I feel like, it's possible that kids might work in only 3 groups throughout the whole year. Maybe you switch it 3 times. But I am an advocate of keeping them together for multiple projects so that they can build on the skills that they're acquiring.
And likewise, what do you suggest when there is that group that it's just not working?
So we're going to get to that, but
okay.
Well,
then we'll address it when we get to it.
Yeah. And then if I don't address that question, please come back at me. Okay. These are just some fun low risk activities, right? So this is a couple here. Give one, get one, which I'm going to show you later. Okay, what I know, what I want to know, what I want to learn, right? Groups can do that together. Like if you give a group a project and it's a content piece, they can do that together. They can make the chart, you can have a scribe, and the kids can brainstorm together. And that's it's a low risk activity for them that they can do together. Combination man, this is a great one for a group of 4 or 5 kids, 4 kids probably. And I'm embarrassed to tell you that this actually originates in my home. You fold a piece of paper 4 times you have a piece of paper, a vertical, you can see it on the right. You see those pictures, and the paper gets passed. So the first person might be responsible for drawing a head. And then they fold that piece back so that the next person can't see what was drawn. And then the next person might be responsible for drawing the abdomen. And then the next person might be responsible just for the bottom to the knees. And then the next person might be responsible for the feet. And you come up with this collaborative, collective piece of art this person or man or woman that is, you know, completely disjointed and super fun and funny. And so it's just a nice, creative, and again, low risk activity. The Lego challenge is something that I included in the folder. The directions are in the folder that you're going to get a link to, and it has to do, it's really fun. You have a bunch of Legos, and the people in the group each have a role. So if there's 5 people, roll 1, roll 2, roll, and then each person can only do certain things and only handle certain Legos, and the directions are all in there. And then together, and nobody can speak. And together you wind up creating this specific Lego structure. I'll leave it at that. The directions are in the folder. And then the last thing is, this is a super easy one, where, do you see the image on the upper right corner? You ask individual kids to count the squares, and then you have them do the same thing in pairs. And then you can have them do the same thing in like a group of 4, where they combine their knowledge. And each time you compare, so you see, you know, as an individual, a student was able to get this number of squares. As a team, they got this number, which was more. And then in a foursome, they're going to get even closer to the total number of squares that you can see. And so it sort of teaches interdependence and how you can benefit when you all combine your knowledge. Okay, so those are some quickies that you can do. So the next, I just want to make sure I didn't skip. Okay. The next piece that you have to train them on, right, is communication skills. So again, I mean, this is just an example, right, of how we talk productively. You know, what it means to have eye contact, to lean in, to modulate your voice, how we listen attentively, and actually think about what the partner is saying before we turn around and speak immediately, and just sit and wait, you know, as opposed to sitting and waiting until we can say what's on our minds. And in terms of problem solving or discussing effectively, these are just some examples of prompts that you can post and teach and model. You know, a great way to model, by the way, is through a fishbowl. So I would heartily recommend that when you are teaching these communication skills of any kind, that you put a group inside, you have an external group observe and make comments. And something else that I do with fishbowl sometimes is I allow for tapping in. And if you think your kids can handle it, it's really fun, because then somebody from the outside can get up, and after a particular, you know, there might be a rule like you can tap in and replace somebody if that person has spoken 3 times in the inner circle. Then you come in, a person from the outer circle can tap, dismiss a person from the inner circle, and then take his or her place. It makes it fun for kids, and also everybody gets that active practice. So this is just, you know, just some sentence models. Thanks for explaining that. That's a great idea, blank, you know. Any ideas how to modify these for COVID, or are those coming later? Can't share supplies or leave desks, etc. Okay, so I do have a lot of ideas later about technology that I've included. In terms of like these particular skills, they are conversational skills. So this is something that you can do right over Zoom. So if you're virtual, it's not a problem. I think that what you're asking, Emily, is if kids are in the classroom, right, and they can't leave their desks and can't share supplies. So yeah, that's hard in this setting. Definitely hard to, Emily's writing again, our struggle is how with students in person we collaborate. Air high fives are popular. Thank you, Dylan. So air high fives. And, you know, for everybody on, if you want to do just like Dylan just did, we would all love to hear your recommendations and strategies. Jill's talking about elbow bumps. I mean, there's also signs that you can hold up. I mean, kids can have these conversations at a distance. You know, if you're 6 feet apart at your desks, you can still practice these conversations. You can practice them in pairs, right? Because there's 2 desks next to each other, 6 feet apart. You can practice them in pairs.
Thumbs up. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the ASL applause sign. I wish I'm doing this, but that's from Hawaii. Sorry.
Daydream.
Okay.
I like this. They have both in-person and remote students. So they have an in-person partner up with a remote learner.
Yeah.
Zoom.
That's great.
And then breakout rooms. Yeah.
Put students in breakout rooms, in Zoom, in small groups. The other thing you can do is you could actually do a fishbowl in a Zoom, right? You pick 4 or 5 students to be the internal. I mean, visually, obviously, you can't do it, but and then you can have the rest of the people on the Zoom observe. And then if someone wants to, and then you would debrief afterwards. And if someone wanted to break into the small group, the person could raise their hand or write into the chat. But yeah, no, the physical piece is hard this year. So I don't know if you guys all saw, hold on for a sec. This was just something to add to other people's thinking. And then affirm, oh, sorry, wrong way. And then disagreeing, right? So these are, I like those models. So you're free to use them. And these are some examples of team self-reflection. I think that was the last bullet on that previous slide. Thinking about how your group performed, read each of the following points and rate your collaborative group work using the rating scale provided. And actually, I am going to go back. I'm going to escape out of this for 1 second so I can show you. Sorry, I meant to put it on, or, so it would come in after, but I wanted to show you that this is there for you. And there's a series of indicators for the collaborative work, right? We gave appropriate time to allow others, we contribute, and then the group itself, like the kids could do this individually and then use a protocol to compare their feedback. And this is just, oops, sorry. And this is another form, similar. This is an open-ended one, okay? And so you're welcome to those. Again, the slides will be in the folder. So these are some more tips that I picked up in my research. Have work done in class. It doesn't seem to go very well when you assign collaborative work to be done at home. There's most often too many variables for that students have to overcome to get together individually. I mean, I see that done at the college level and sometimes at the high school level, but I think probably K-8, I wouldn't endeavor it. It seems that groups of 4 to 5 are ideal. And I think, and I'm sure that many of you have done this, survey students beforehand. Sometimes teachers have kids write down like the top 5 people that they may want to work with, or top 3 people that they may think that they would work best with, right? And same thing, is there anyone in the class that you feel you absolutely could not work with? And it can get tacky. So you may not go, I may not go for the negative question. But you as a teacher can observe that on your own, I think, and make those decisions. Developing norms and routines with the students, very important. right? Get their input. It's like developing a rubric with students, right? You're going to develop your collaborative work routines with them so that their input, and then you're going to post them and revisit them. You're always going to help the students plan their work and use some gradual release. And I'm going to get to gradual release in a sec. This is a planning tool. These are a couple of planning tools right here. The one on the left is the setting your goals, and the one on the right is we've reached our goals. Okay, so you are more than welcome to these documents, which I myself have lifted from various places. Okay. And I just want to address gradual release for a second. I had another webinar last week where we went over gradual release. And you know, as teachers, we all know what gradual release means. It's sort of the bread and butter of our work. But just a couple things to point out, that when you do gradual release, so if at the point where you're doing liftoff, you don't want to model and work with students around their collaborative learning and teach them and teach them and teach them, and model it and develop it, and then hit them in their first activity together with something that's cognitively demanding. So the way you want them, if they're going to master the collaborative work skills, that's a high demand in and of itself. So you want to lower the cognitive demand of the tasks that you're asking them to do, right? You want to make it as simple at the beginning as you can and really straightforward. So that's just something to keep in mind. And another thing about the gradual releases, scaffolding cooperative learning, a really good way to do that is to start by training the kids in pairs, right? It's much more manageable to work with one other person for most kids than it is a group of 4. So I would encourage you to start with partners when you're doing this training for collaborative work.
And Karen, someone wrote in that he read an article once where a teacher every week asked students to name 2 people who they would like to sit near. And that only went to the teacher. And this helped the teacher know which kids were not connecting to anyone. What a great idea, huh? So the students would only write to the teacher. It wasn't
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about, I guess my question back is, did you then redo the seating every week?
Well,
really
he just said he read an article. So
Oh, I think that's really neat.
Yeah.
I think it's fabulous. So we all know what think, pair, share is, right? But it's think, pair, share allows itself, this is like the think, pair, share plus, right? So round 1 is individual students have to think or write about a discussion or a topic. And then easy enough, we're all very accustomed to doing the pair part. And then I love when I'm at workshops and then your pair then is merged with another pair. And it's a really nice way to build into a group share. So after you have trained your kids and helped them to develop the skills to work with pairs, right? Then you consider moving to groups. This is just an example of some roles that a particular group, took on. The point being that it's most effective when everyone has an important role in the group. And once you get beyond 4 or 5 people, you're losing, some of the roles start to become fluff, and you want to avoid that because kids see through it, and we know that. So somebody started to write about this before. I saw a comment. I would love to hear for all of you, when you do cooperative or collaborative learning, what are some of the things that you consider when you are putting kids in groups? If you could just flood that chat. No one? Personalities of the kids.
I have a share. Della here. I think you should always be careful of, be cognizant of putting a strong learner with a not so strong learner so that there's some support there.
So matching kids that are stronger academically with some that are not quite as strong. Is that
Correct.
what you're saying, Della?
Yes.
Okay. It is. I definitely, I am a big advocate of mixed groupings, most definitely. I agree with you. There's really good modeling going on. Abilities, behaviors, Bill wrote in choice, carefully putting a student with special needs into a supportive group, similar interests, behaviors, peer relationships. Yep. You want to think about all of that, right? So we know that our groups are going to fail unless we very, very intentionally set them up for success. And which is another reason that you don't necessarily want to switch your groups around that much, right? You theoretically have put a lot of thought into what's going to be a successful group. There's not that many permutations of that in your classroom. So I think it's better to put them into a successful groups and have them have multiple successes and change the groups a little less frequently. We'll talk about how to fix groups that or problems that come up in groups. Thank you, Melissa. English speakers with those who are proficient speakers. Great. So these, some of the decisions that you need to make, obviously group construction, what protocols you're going to use, the pacing of it, how much control you want to have over the sources that students use. I always used to like Webquests when they were in vogue, because you create sort of a perfectly controlled environment and then you let your kids go free, which is really the best way to do things. You've controlled an environment that everyone can access, all the resources are safe. There's a set number of choices, and then you're able to say to the students and the groups, like, have at it. And that's really ideal. You have to make decisions about product options, which, obviously maybe not so obviously, but you want to include as much choice as is humanly possible without it turning to chaos or unproductivity. So that is something to think about, and how you're going to assess, and then whether your emphasis is on a process or a product, and the level of interdependence. How much can your kids handle, right? These are all very personal decisions, and whether the learning, when I say emphasis on process or product, where are you putting the emphasis for learning? Is the emphasis for learning about the collaboration, learning about yourself as a learner, learning about groups and how groups work, learning process skills, organization, self-advocacy, planning, backward planning, checking, those are all learning goals in and of themselves. So is that where you want your emphasis to be, or do you want your emphasis to be on the content learning and the product that the students produce? That's your choice, right? But I think that that's going to vary. This was from Kagan himself, right? So in my preparation, I was doing some reading, and something that I read in Educational Leadership, and this is not surprising. All academic grades need to be individual, right? We need to design experiences where we can glean whether students are meeting the standards that were set out at the beginning of the unit or the project. But the collaboration feedback should be collective, right? They can get a group grade for their collaboration, but the academic grades, obviously, because you need to stay somewhat competency-based. It doesn't make sense for a learner to ride on someone else's A, because that's not benefiting that learner. Any questions or comments around that?
I don't see anything yet. Comments, someone else just said they also love Webquest. So for
Yeah,
anyone that hasn't checked it out, it's worth checking out.
I don't know, Dylan. I don't hear about Webquest anymore. If you have some good Webquests that you want to share, bring it on, because I don't hear about them. Some challenges. I don't know if you have, what is her name? Anyway, I'll remember in a second, but I forgot her name, but I did some reading from one of my favorite bloggers, and about some of the challenges that, actually, she's probably down here underneath. Yeah. Better cult of pedagogy. She's a great blogger, and I can't recommend her enough. Super smart lady. Cult of pedagogy. And here are the 4 biggest challenges, right? It's when you have a group and some kids are doing all the work and some kids are not, or you have some sort of interpersonal conflict that makes the group unproductive, or the kids don't stay on task, or a student absence completely messes up the schedule and throws off the completion of the work. So I'm going to go through and try to address each of these challenges. And I would love to hear your ideas too. So in terms of the unequal student contributions, I think that your best bet, fixing this comes with the front loading. So the more you've established structural roles, defined the procedures, helped the kids to internalize those boundaries, those roles, those procedures, and help them to set up the norms ahead of time and to agree and internalize those norms, the better, then the less likely you'll have students that are slacking. Another way, and again, you can do this in a fishbowl, right, is you could role play and model what you don't want to see and what you do want to see. And then periodically, if a unit or a project is 6 weeks or 6 weeks is a long time, 4 weeks, you might need to, at the beginning of each week, revisit sort of the expectations of what it looks like when everyone is contributing. You should certainly start, and I addressed this a little earlier with the gradual release, right? Start with shorter, easier projects and have them self-reflect so that they bring that self-knowledge and that group knowledge into their next project together. And so you're working on the systems of collaboration first. That's your highest priority, not the output, not the products, not even necessarily the content learning. You really, yes, the content learning is happening, but your emphasis at first needs to be on the procedural pieces of collaborative work. And then I would just say, stick to just a few structures that they know. And we'll talk about structures in a little bit. This is going very fast, and I hope I get to everything. Okay. In terms of the conflicts, start with the team building. Don't bypass that, right? Start with those activities that will make them feel good about working together. And then we talked earlier about surveying the kids to make sure that they're working at least with 1 or 2 kids that they can get along with. And then you're going to monitor them, right? They're all working, but you are constantly walking around and monitoring them. And also you can give them surveys, right? At the end of every week, you can give them individual surveys. How did it go for your group this week? And for groups that are having trouble, I would take them and directly go at it, like group therapy, basically, like what seems to be the problem and help them troubleshoot. And as needed, speak to individuals. For off task, you teach kids how to use their timers. There's so many cool timers around. Teachers use them all the time. So that's something that's really, really useful. Have them do check-ins, but also you check in with them, right? So you have regular check-ins where you pull groups aside to keep them on task or join their group. And then this last part is really, really, is really important. I am a believer that if children can do something, they will. in most instances. So I really feel like if they're really goofing around, they may not know how to take on the next task or how to manage the process. So I would go back to yourself. If you see the kids are off task in a specific group, or that, you know, maybe a couple of the groups, I would go back and look at the task and do some more investigation about the accessibility of what you're asking them to do. And for this piece, you want to, you know, if students are absent, this is a hard one. And you can have some optional pieces, right? That if a student is absent, maybe that particular piece just won't be included, right? Or if a student is absent and they want to work from home, you know, an optional piece for them that they don't need the rest of the group to do. And defining the roles, the responsibilities, and keeping, for example, that chart that I showed you earlier is a really good way to keep things clear about what students have to do, so that it doesn't just sort of get shelved and things get forgotten, right, if kids are absent. And then finally, have them set goals together. And as part of the procedures that they set together, have them put in a procedure for absenteeism. You know, who contacts an absent student? After how many days of absence is it decided that then someone else takes on the responsibility that that student had? You know, so have them sort of pre-plan for that situation. So now I'm going to show you some of the tools, and you guys know about these, so I'm going to go pretty quickly. Jamboard, so you know about slides, you know about docs, you know about sheets, we know about Google Suite. I would put Jamboard in there with your tools, because Jamboard's tons of fun and it's engaging and it's collaborative. As long as you know, if you're working virtually and you put a link into the chat, and then all the kids in that group can access it and they can work together on a single document. And in this case for Jamboard, it's slides. So I would definitely use Jamboard. And Google Keep is a tool. And if you want to know more about Google Keep, we can do a separate session for you, or you can, you know, just send me an email and we can go over that. It can help groups to communicate and meet their deadlines and set schedules and goals and communicate around those expectations collectively. And Lauren loves Google Keep, so me too. Here's some other great tools. So I'm sure many of you know about this. Padlet's my favorite. That was part of a activity that I did with a 4th grade class around SEL. But Padlet's just the coolest. It's so easy. You give the kids a link and they can upload stuff, and you put it on a wall and everything's there, and it can be visual, it can be words, it can be any sort of media. Padlet's a really easy collaborative way to create mind maps. So, and I tried to show you here that you can put in videos and visuals, also just incredibly easy and free. VoiceThread, it's a little more complicated, but it is a very good collaborative piece of technology. And you use visuals and voice. Group members can comment on other people's presentations. You can upload materials. It's just a very comprehensive collaborative tool. Parlay, I would be surprised if a lot of you know about Parlay. I hadn't heard of it, but I work a lot at Pinkerton with groups and with some students actually at Pinkerton, and I learned about Parlay from them because they love what Parlay does for their class discussions, for their virtual class discussions in particular, because you know how when you're on Zoom and it's hard and people are interrupting and you're like, and then you don't get to talk. Parlay helps to manage that process. And then it also gives opportunity for the group to sort of assess their conversations. And so it's It's just for group discussions in writing and orally, and it's very, very good. And Cooperative is another collaborative tool. That's a lot of fun. That's very flexible. And Book Creator for younger kids. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left. If you guys want to write in some of your favorite strategies, that would be great. Write them in as I'm talking, because we have a lot, and I am so sure that many of you have done some of these. So really what I'm trying to do here is send you to specific places to learn more. Project-based learning, and the best place to explore project-based learning, and there's tons of resources, is PBL Works. They used to be called the Buck Institute. For those of you that don't know PBL Works, you might know the Buck Institute. And the whole idea of project-based learning is that you set up, 4 weeks, 6 weeks for younger kids, maybe 2 weeks. It depends, on what your kids can manage. There's a lot of scaffolding and planning up front, right? All of these collaborative processes need to be learned by students before they start. But once they have these skills under their belt, they engage in real world problems, right? So, there's actually examples on the site, and you can read all about them. But I know schools that have done things where, they've reworked their lunchroom to make it more comfortable for students. Or, I know of a school that actually assigned a problem-based learning that involved kids in reworking their lunchroom for COVID, right? So there's all sorts of different projects that you can come up with that are problems that students really want to solve and can invest in within their school community, within their town. And the more student-centered and student relevant you can make it, the better. And they create a public product. Maybe it's a plan for the lunchroom. Maybe it's a plan for the senior lounge. Maybe it's a plan to support, in a middle school, it might be a plan to support younger students when they struggle with technology or anything, right? So that's project-based. Another model, right, for collaborative cooperative learning is you can look at design thinking. And I have also done this at a middle and high school level, where in the Stanford Design School, you can go up, they have a resource site for K through 12. These are the steps of design thinking. And it's pretty cool. Obviously you can see it starts with sort of empathizing with your population, and that I could go on about this, but I won't, because it's coming to an end. But if you want to talk further about it, I'm happy to. But these are the steps. And if you go to the Stanford Design School site, you're going to learn a lot more and get some great ideas. The Right Question Institute, the question formulation technique is a very cool thing to do, and it's low risk. And I've done it very successfully with kids as young as 2nd grade. It involves putting kids into collaborative groups, showing them a stimulus, introducing content to them, and then having them work together to generate as many questions about the content as they can. And it's brainstorming, so it's a non-judgmental situation. And then they stop as a group. They may order the questions, prioritize the questions, change questions into statements, change yes and no questions to open-ended questions. And you talk about this sort of questioning process as part of the beginning of potentially like an inquiry into a topic. So you can look that up at the Right Question Institute, and that's at Harvard. They do a lot of PD around this. And then I think this is the last, those were 3 models that I introduced. And then these are some techniques that I wanted to share with you. Harkness, and you can look this up, and I do believe that Harkness can be done as early as 4th, 5th grade, all right? You're basically putting a question out into the circle, or the students are generating questions, right? And it's the thing that I love about Harkness is it's an entirely student-centered strategy. It's the student's obligation to keep the conversation going. And you can, as opposed to like Socratic seminar, the teacher is delivering the questions and the stimulus. I mean, obviously the teacher's going to provide the stimulus in Harkness, but it's the kids that generate the questions. So it's really builds student agency and responsibility for learning. And then down here, this is an idea for a fishbowl Harkness, right? Where these kids inside might be carrying on a Harkness discussion, and the kids outside might be making observations about the skills of the discussers, but also tracking. If you go up here to the right on the top, the kids outside, some of them, their job might be to track the input of all of the different kids in the circle, because that's what you do in a Harkness. And then afterwards, you have a collective conversation about what it means to be engaged in a conversation. What does quality engagement look like? Who was most engaged? Who was least engaged? What does it mean to save space for other people? You know, and sort of those types of questions. Another technique is reciprocal teaching. And I'm a big fan, rah, reciprocal teaching. If you go on the internet, you will find a gazillion resources. It's basically it's a text protocol, right? Where students are teaching each other. In a small group, you have a piece of text. Students are taking turns reading. You stop at periodic points, and each person in the group has a role. One person is a summarizer of the text that was just read. Someone is in charge of generating questions. Someone is in charge of clarifying unknown words. And then someone is in charge of, based on the previous text read, making predictions about what will come next. And so I want to emphasize again that you definitely want to do that front loading and modeling if you're going to try to endeavor this. You can't do it without that modeling and without getting the kids comfortable in each of the roles, and the roles rotate, right? Okay, now the next 6 or 7 are some of which you will know about. These are smaller scale strategies for collaboration. We all know about Jigsaw. I'm not going to go too much into it, although I did like this visual because it's a nice reminder, right? So everybody starts in their groups, and then everybody mixes up and teaches one another what they did in what they learned in their original group. That's the main. I just like the visual because sometimes I can't visualize how it all goes down. World Cafe. This is a great one, right? There's 3 rounds. Everyone moves to, so you're addressing a question, and then participants, they move to a different table, and is a different question being discussed. All right, and then everyone adds to the previous groups. So there's chart paper that's recording all of the learning at each table, and it grows as people move, you know, around the tables. Numbered heads. Okay, so first year alone, they have thinking time, writing time, and then they put their heads together. They discuss until they have consensus. Teacher selects a number at random. Numbered students respond in a variety of ways. Okay, and this is a Kagan. I want you to know that there's a document in the folder that details all of these. Okay, so you won't have to go any further than that folder for most of these strategies. I hope some of you have done Chalk Talk. It's super fun. There's no talking, just writing. You put a question in the middle, the kids write. They respond to each other's, you know, it becomes this beautiful, what's the word, mural maybe, of communication and shared learning in writing. Give one, get one. I referred to that before. So given a topic or question, they respond, the kids might respond. I, as an individual, might respond in the first row, but then I'm going to mill around and I'm going to give one and get one to everybody else in the class. So these are basically just structures, right? They're not even techniques, they're structures. And this is just a list of some text rendering protocols that are some of my favorites. You read a piece of text, you view something, small groups get together. Each person, if there's a group of 5, you've probably done this in professional development workshops, right? Everybody goes around and shares a sentence summarizing what they took away. Then everyone goes around, it's okay, Beth, and says a phrase and then a word of their one at a time. So that's a sentence, phrase, word. A whip around is just really basic. 4 A's, after you have a text or a film or any sort of thought-provoking piece of media, you have the 4 A's. What were the author's assumptions? What do you agree with? What do you want to argue with? And what do you want to act on? And that can be done in a small group. And then I'm assuming many of you have heard of final word. Okay. And I've rushed at the end because I don't want to keep you all later than you need to be, because you're spending a lot of time online. I am around. All of the resources that you've seen, like there'll be stuff in that folder around reciprocal teaching, around question formulation technique. Everything is in that folder. It's chock full, and you'll get the link to that tomorrow. I did want to let you know that the recording of this particular webinar will be on our YouTube channel, so you can access it anytime. And we would love, there's my contact information. And if there's anything in here that you want to talk in more detail about, you can send me an email and I am happy to chat with you about it and give you any more information that you need. And if you could fill out the feedback survey, that would be great. And that's it. And thank you for taking the time to be with us today.